You're listening to Mornings with Cassie McCullough on ABC Radio Sydney.
Yes, and now to managing money within your relationships. It's a tricky topic, and I think many people still find it difficult to talk about, and it's often one of the reasons deep down that some relationships don't survive. So there's a lot at stake, particularly in the last 2 years. Loss of income, loss of work has made this part of life particularly tough for some, and having to financially lean on your partner in ways you've never imagined it can be very uncomfortable. So this morning, how do you manage the money coming into your household? Do you see your partner's income as yours and vice versa? And maybe you don't. Maybe you keep things separate, despite having shared assets and even children. Let's talk to Vanessa Stoykov. She's a financial educator and money expert. She's the CEO of Evolution Media Group, which provides financial education. Vanessa, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, there was a time, I suppose not that long ago, when things were pretty straightforward in this country. Women would often be given a part of their husband's wage for groceries and maybe even, stockings or other personal items. We're a long way from that, but there's still this to and fro. Money in relationships, how do you see it done best?
Well, I think there's no one solution for best, but I think the best relationships have honesty about money and an agreed plan. I remember a few years back, as part of our education suite, we did some research on who lies most about money in a relationship. And it came out pretty equal, to be honest, that men and women lied about money and where it was being spent pretty equally. And it was about 30% of respondents who said they did. So I think the world is far from perfect when it comes to money. COVID has put real strain on people because there's been whole households who've lost their income, and then there's been half, one partner's lost theirs and the others kept going, and that's put pressure on them. So I really feel like there's a bit of a pressure cooking going on under the surface for people, and there's a nervousness around money and an anxiousness around security, because when you think about money, what does money buy you? It buys you security. And when you don't have that, life becomes stressful, and then it plays out in your relationship. I'll be interested to see how much the divorce rate rises once COVID settles down. Then, the implications for houses. I mean, Melbourne, Sydney, if you own a house and you get divorced and split the proceeds, you'll never buy another house again. So there's so many implications for relationships with money, particularly at the moment.
Oh, wow. Gosh, that's pretty stark. So just you think that people of a certain age who are splitting assets may never really recover in this particular housing market?
Well, I mean, you kind of think it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? A windfall if your house is worth so much more, but then what do you do when you halve it? I know people, I've got friends who've been divorced and they'll never financially recover because, they're going to live in an apartment instead of a home, and then they're paying rent instead of ownership, and they don't have an asset at the end, and they've split their super. And, someone said to me, an older man once, "Never get divorced, love." And I'm like, "Oh, for love." He goes, "No, for money." He said he'd been divorced twice and it had decimated him. And I thought, well, yeah, that's an interesting perspective for relationships too. It motivates you to make it work.
Well, yes, although, some people just can't stay for a range of reasons, and that's where things can, really go south and become dangerous for all in the family. So, yeah, I mean, it's really tricky. But what you're saying more broadly is that there's two aspects to this. One is the cold, hard cash. Can you pay to keep a roof over your head? Can you, put food on the table? And if there's kids involved, can you, get them out the door and, to school dressed in, appropriate uniforms and all the costs that come with children? The other side is what's going on emotionally.
And that's a big one. I mean, when you look at money and worth and money and status are very closely aligned. So what you do tends to be who you are in our society. So for people who've lost their jobs, I mean, I remember the Qantas pilots, we saw them out at Bunning. Bunnings working there because they needed work. And
this is in the recent COVID
yeah, in
layoffs.
this COVID, so many layoffs, so many hospitality workers and people who own restaurants and, have had to do other things. And that would play with your worth and your mental well-being and financial well-being and mental well-being are so closely linked now because nothing is more stressful than money. And I think there's a lot of women who've the burden on women too. I've got 3 kids and my husband's very involved, but I would still say in COVID, probably more fell to me to manage my work offline and everything because mothers sort of do that. And now there'll be a whole bunch of men ringing and things saying thanks. But no, I feel like everyone's got more of a burden in COVID. A lot of couples are bearing strain and less income in COVID. And then the outcome for that is unhappy parents equals unhappy kids too. So, there's a whole bunch of things going on under the surface that, my work, I'm just trying to get people to open up and talk about it and say it's okay. It's like mental health. It's okay to talk about money and your worries and what you can do and sort of take it as an opportunity to replan your life, actually. If ever we're getting one to wipe the slate, it's now.
Yeah, it is a period of great upheaval, but also great deep change in lots of ways, and that can be a positive thing. Vanessa Stoykov is with us. She's a financial educator, and we're talking about what's happening to household finances in this strange period we've been through and we're still in. Maybe you've had a shake-up of your household. I'd be interested to hear, what the challenge was and then perhaps also what the solution that you found is. And not just, husband and wife, heterosexual relationships with children. I'm also interested in people who don't live in arrangements like that. Maybe you live on your own and you've had to kind of start sharing your household finances or at least ask for help or help others out. What calls have been made on you as someone perhaps who's had a more stable income? 1300 222 702. Somebody on our text line, Chris says, good morning. My wife had all our household funds. I didn't even have a bank account. It worked fine for 43 years until she left us. I am an accountant. And I think this person means left us as in she passed away. So
that's lucky. I was going to say, I was picturing her in Barbados for a minute there.
Yeah.
Till she left with a large sum of cash.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a good point, isn't it? That some relationships just naturally fall into a way that operates really well.
And there is usually a controller. I'm the controller in our relationship and one that doesn't want control as much. I grew up when my dad worked in the coal mines in Gunnedah as a fitter and turner, but everything in his pay packet went to Mum. Dad didn't keep any money on him. And Mum ran the whole thing, but he was very happy to turn over the money because she knew what had to be paid. So, but that was interesting for me growing up as a woman. I'm like, I want my money. Like I want, so that drove me. And if you look, I talk a lot about the psychology of how you grew up and what you learnt about money from your parents or your carers isn't necessarily the most positive things, but you really have to look at it and go, does that still serve me the way they did it? Is that still how it works for me? And really reassess it.
And what about lies? I mean...
look, we've all scruffed up shoes and said, no, they're old. Or maybe that's just me, but I do know plenty of people who've done that.
Haven't heard of that
one, you're out there scraping them on the rocks. But I think those are the white lies. But I guess I also have friends who've been the victims of systematic lies where their partner has racked up a lot of debt and taken a second mortgage. And that's serious stuff. And one thing I would say, woman, man, or otherwise, is you need to know your money position. And regardless of if your partner's got it covered, just ask questions. You don't have to take over paying the bills, but ask questions. What super do you have? Super's incredibly important in relationships.
What credit cards do you have?
Yeah, what debt do you have? What have we got to pay off? What are our goals? And I feel like people don't often look at money as an opportunity to get closer in a relationship and have shared goals. But if you can, then, you're set because you're working to the same goal, so you don't need to lie. And there's a process around that. I'm building a process of a course at the moment to teach people that. Because it can be fun. I know that sounds boring,
it
but
does take me a little bit of time to accept that, Vanessa. But Look,
I've put alcohol
worthwhile.
in it.
I'll do with worthwhile, but fun stretching it. Hey, look, you are fun to talk to about this stuff, Vanessa, and I always feel a pang of both, I should be doing this, but also reassurance that it can be done and it's not all disaster. So it's great to talk to you about this stuff. Thanks for being there with us.
No worries.